What is going on, guys? It is Blank here, back with a new guide. Now in this guide we'll be talking about how you can increase your win rate. So guys, let's get to it. So we'll be talking about early game, mid game, and late game. I'll be giving you guys the best tips and tricks of winning more Fortnite games. Early game and late game are usually the hardest to get through, but I'll be going over a few important things you should be doing to get through it easier. So let's start off with early game. The first thing I'll be talking about is glider deployment. Knowing when to deploy your glider is super important, because if you're able to hold that W key right into the doorway of your house, you'll be the first one to the weapons and easily be able to eliminate players entering your house without the weapons. Even if you're not around any sort of building, still being low enough around the area you land at will usually grant you the weapon first. You'd be surprised that most people don't pay attention to this whole strategy. While it's super important to know, start off by going to the same few areas and mark trees or any objects you have to be deployed around in order to make it to that door without needing to spot or glide over it a few extra seconds. If you figure out the objects, you'll be holding that W key right into the entrance of the area you land at. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is weapon choice. If you're landing at a house, then you're kind of blindfolded towards what weapons you can go for. You can't really glide towards a specific weapon, but as long as you've gotten any weapon once you get in, you'll be able to eliminate any players running into the house quite easily. Although, if you're landing in an area where weapons spawn outside, then you gotta make sure you're choosing the right first weapon. So the weapons I'll usually go for right off the bat is any sort of shotgun, because any players around me are most likely going to be in range to use that shotgun at. Now if I find any sort of automatic weapons as my secondary, then I'm pretty set, especially if I have a pump. I can combo the pump with the automatic weapon to grant me easier eliminations right off the bat. If I can't spot any sort of shotgun, then I'll go for an SMG next. The SMGs are your next best bet because all the SMGs have pretty good hipfire accuracy when jumping around. As I said, most opponents you'll encounter will be right around the corner, and you won't be standing still aiming down sights when firing shots. Now your next option would be any automatic weapons. The ARs don't have the greatest hipfire accuracy, which is why they're basically last. Now last is actually the burst weapon. You don't want to pick up bursts first, because jumping around shooting a burst isn't easy to do. Any missed shots will result in losing seconds of putting on damage towards your opponent. So these are the order of weapon choices I'd go for right from the start. Having a good glide pathway and spotting the right weapons will give you that advantage you need early game. So depending on the weapons you start with will determine the playstyle you have to stick with early game. If you've got yourself a solid setup with a shotgun, SMG, AR, and some shields within the first 30 seconds of the match, then play aggressive, because you've either got a way better setup compared to all your opponents or you're on par with them. And most of the time you'll probably have a better setup. The longer you delay the pushes, the better weapons your opponents will gather. If you wait too long, the fights will get harder. Your goal is to clear out as many people as you can and make your early game easier. If you've landed on a sniper, burst, pistol, or even AR, then you'll have to play the situations a little different, a little more defensive and at range. Your goal isn't to look for opponents, your goal is to keep looting for better close range weapons while avoiding fights. If you do have to take a fight, then you'll usually want to take the fights at range with the specific weapons. Pistols can be either or, but snipers and ARs are fights you want to take at range. Being at range will give you more accurate shots, because you'll be able to aim in and not need to hit fire with the pretty bad bloom those guns provide. Especially a sniper, you don't really want to try no scoping players, and that's probably not going to work out. Now let's get more into the mid game. During mid game you want to make sure your materials are pretty solid. I'd say at least have 1,000 total materials to work with, because you always have to expect every opponent you run into to have at least 1k. It's pretty common for every player to gather wood as they're rotating towards the circle, and usually mid game everyone's got max wood. Now, some opponents might have more materials depending on the amount of eliminations they got. More eliminations will usually mean way more materials, because they'll gather more from all their opponents. Although intense build battles can burn through materials quite easily. Overall guys, just make sure you're always having good wood up towards the top numbers. You also want to make sure you're choosing the right weapons for your loadout. My ideal loadout is an AR, SMG, pump or heavy shotgun, any sniper, and minis. I'll usually always hold minis over any medkits, because I expect myself to be able to retake my minis if I've gotten shot. If you're always regenerating yourself to 50 shield after getting shot, your health won't go down that quick. You want to make sure you don't go for pushes without retaking minis. Without minis, your risk of dying is much greater. The main reason I hold minis over full shields is because minis take 2 seconds to use. Although 2 full shields will get me to full shield, but the 2 seconds per minis is much more convenient during a fight. So overall, you want to make sure your loadout is solid during mid game, and you want to hold those minis and get good with taking them at the right times. When to take fights or rotating are 2 things you want to pay attention to. If you're in the safe zone, then you can take a fight. Now, the fights you usually want to avoid are any fights where your opponents are already holding the high ground. So if he's up on a mountain, you might be able to sneak up onto him. But if he's got his fort built up top, then it's usually a fight you want to avoid. Basically, you want to avoid pushing opponents that have forts already set up because of that starting high ground advantage. The fights you do want to take are fights where you can see opponents roaming around just like you. Those are fights you can take. If you're not the greatest builder and you're going for that win, then setting up a fort anywhere in the circle and just playing the time will be your best bet. Although you want to make sure you're taking those fights most of the time because that's how you get better at the game, by building that experience. You can fort yourself up mid game once in a while if you're still fighting your opponents during mid game every few games or so. Now, other fights you should be taking are third-party fights. If you notice 2 players fighting and one of them gets eliminated, push the player that's alive because he's most likely low on health. If he's boxed himself in, then you want to make sure you're shooting out his walls as you get closer. That way he's got no time to heal and you'll be fighting a player with lower health. Because every time he rebuilds a wall, you know he hasn't had time to heal. Now remember, in all these situations, the safe zone is the first priority. If you're nowhere near the safe zone, then avoid taking fights. Focus on getting in first, because winning a fight doesn't get you any closer to the zone. If you do see players fighting outside the zone, then get in first and wait for the winner of the fight to get into the zone. You can usually apply pressure as he's still needing to run in. Your opponent will now have to worry about the zone and you. Once again, safe zone distance over fights. Now, if you've made it to endgame, then keep it up because you're doing great. During endgame, you'll most likely see a lot more forts set up around you, and you'll want to do the same, and your goal is to slow down the fighting. Most of the time, you want to chill out during endgame. 90% of your fights have been dealt with during early game and mid game. The focus now is the last few circles. Because of Epic's new circle system, you don't have to worry about where you're positioned in the last few circles, because even if your opponent sets up his fort in the middle of the last few circles, that doesn't mean he's going to be in towards the last 2. If I can remember correctly, the second to last circle is randomly placed on the map, and then the last circle is usually placed somewhere inside the storm. The zone will then move towards that last circle. Now, your main focus is the second last circle, the one that gets randomly placed anywhere on the map. That's the circle you want to set yourself up for. If you've got a launch pad or even bouncers, then that plan will usually work out. You want to use the launch pad right when the new circle forms, and you want to build yourself a base right in the middle. Your opponents are now going to have the low ground and are going to be at a super close distance towards you to where you can easily pressure them into the win. Already being set up with the high ground will give you that advantage you need as long as you're a pretty alright player. This is exactly how I'll play out the endgame circle to give me an increased chance of closing out the game. So guys, hopefully this can help some people out. You might have been making the wrong weapon choices or making the wrong decisions, which is why I wanted to make this guide, as it strictly focuses on great step-by-step ways of increasing that win rate. A like and a sub will be greatly appreciated as it does help me out a lot. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and night, and I'll see you on the next one.